Because if I try to do it, my kernel will.
Is that HDMI? No. Okay. That's what I have.
I believe the echo person is something for
I know I heard the guy. Ben, you have a Thunderbolt, the VGA?
Oh my God.
Yes, we're still using things like 1987
Yeah, we did the
Well, what's tragic is you look at the setup in here, it's like everyone generate digital video. That is digital
Get one. Thank you.
It's like,
Yeah, unfortunately, this video.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I think I lost one. Well, the only thing that
the analog anymore is the
analog. I do not, does anyone else have?
analog, that great thing that yours is the DVI. And that DVI thing, that thing that versus USB.
Oh, that's just probably passive, it's probably dual.
You're doing it back. Okay, you're probably right.
Maybe that thing's worth.
I would bet it's both.
And then
Top level point here.
If you see someone in the queue there and you want to give them the floor, you push this one. You also see here, okay?
Now I know if you put that in the store.
Maybe it's the corresponding dongle in your back.
Yeah, this is.
okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. This is not a flash drive.
Yeah, just hit the red X. You don't want it because you can't press shift on this.
Okay. So let's see. Hooray. Okay.
All right. You may have figured out the AV equipment.
I'm just gonna get and so I guess I'm gonna check if the people in the queue. Okay. Can you people in the remote queue hear me? Hmm?
There's no easy way to say yes, really.
Yeah. Right. That is very true. All right.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, I think we're going to get started. Welcome to the inaugural meeting of the Cellar Working Group. It's Codec Encoding for Lossless Archiving and Real-Time Transmission. This is our first in-person meeting. The working group was established at the end of 2015. This is my first time chairing a meeting, so bear with me as we go along. There might be some errors or mistakes, and I'm happy to be corrected. Okay, and I should introduce myself. My name is Tessa Fallon, and I am the co-chair of Cellar. And
I'm Tim Terryberry. I'm the other co-chair.
okay, so I guess to get started, let's mention the note well, which can be found on the IETF website. Tim had an executive summary.
Yeah, what all that text up there is basically saying is that if you are personally aware of IPR relating to a contribution that you are making, specifically IPR owned by you or your employer, then you are required to tell us about it in a timely manner. All the details are in BCP 78 and 79, which you can find online.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is the preliminary, or this is the agenda we circulated prior to the meeting. We've scheduled 10 minutes for the administrivia, 60 minutes for a discussion of EBML and Matroska and the corresponding drafts. The names are on the agenda following the agenda item. 30 minutes for discussion of FFB1 and 20 minutes for wrapping up, talking about next steps, talking about FLAC, which we have not done much with yet, but so that's something that we need to address. Right, so in terms of administrivia, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it. I like the way it's spelled, but I've never heard it pronounced. All right.
Well, before we move on, does anybody have any last minute agenda requests or bashes? All right, thank you. Okay, we'll be circulating blue sheets. Thank you, around the room. So they might already be finished, but if you're the last person to receive it, please, as this gentleman has just done, bring it up here. Lucas is our Jabber scribe. Thank you very much for volunteering. If anybody would like to volunteer to be a minute taker, please raise your hand. No minute takers? Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you, Mo.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I couldn't see you. All right, fantastic. And there is a PDF of the meeting materials available on the data tracker and meeting for the IETF meeting. 2 Twitter hashtags if you feel so inclined, IETF 96 and Cellar 16. So remarks from the chairs.
I don't have anything in particular. We can just go on to the milestones.
Okay. But there's just a brief note about the Cellar origin story, about how the working group was formed in late 2015. Myself and Tim are the chairs. You can find our charter at the URL there, and the mission statement is using existing work done by the development communities of Matroska, FFV1, and FLAC. The working group will formalize specifications for these open and lossless formats. And so these are our current milestones. These were created when the working group was first formed, and some of them were updated this past spring. What needs to be discussed, I think, is whether the dates for these milestones need to be adjusted in light of the work that needs to be done on the current drafts that have been submitted. Yeah, so I guess I will open that up for discussion.
Considering that the dates on 2 of those milestones have already passed.
Yeah.
This is Ben, and I was going to say exactly that the milestones in the past probably need to be adjusted. The ones that are July,
All right. Well, just to give my personal opinion, I think the draft for EBML is probably going to require at least several months more of work, and considering that blocks the drafts for Matroska, which is much larger, I think even the July deadline is going to be unrealistic.
And this has been, again, a clarification question.
Sure.
The drafts that exist right now are for the 1, 2, and 3 milestone, not the version 4 milestone. Is that correct?
So I think the draft that was submitted was standards track, if I remember. Go pull it up here. Yeah, so the individual draft that was submitted currently says that it is standards track, which would seem to indicate it was for the milestone for version 4. It also specifies the elements for all the versions 1, 2, and 3. But our milestone for that is informational, which means that would need to be in a separate document. So I don't currently think the individual draft that was submitted directly targets either of these 2 milestones without some adjustments. So we'll have to figure out how that works.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is David Rice. I mean, to speak about the, I guess the workflow and the habits that we're using versus the informational and standard submission. I mean, for IETF and Matroska, the documentation has been historically developed within the Matroska community and integrates all of the versions together with flags and identifiers to kind of refer to what version they relate to. So we've been continuing to develop it in conjunction like that, but a lot of our recent discussions have been to focus on what specifically to remove from the, I guess, the standards version of this draft that would create the version 4 specification. So I mean, I think a bit of a tactic for us might be to focus really on this standards version and then to drop the aspects that relate to versions 1, 2, and 3. But before the drop would be considered the informational submission, like that it contains all this legacy information. It contains documentation of depreciated elements. Like that entirety could be possibly an informational submission. And then after the removal of the content for 1, 2, and 3, we could have a standard submission for version 4 specifically.
Okay, I think that makes a reasonable amount of sense, and that this draft could probably be modified to do those things. So your intention would be for when you say you're removing the things for 1, 2, and 3, you're then going to include those in a separate document that does not have anything from version 4 in it, and that's what you're going to publish as informational?
I mean, we are certainly looking for advice on how to proceed, but I think there is motivation for the participants to release informational documentation that reflects, the majority of Matroska files that already exist and to be seen, as an informational submission, as well as having a more standardized focus for for version 4. I mean, I know one of the comments we've received is that the document is massive, and if we can remove a lot of the work in progress remnants that are still in the documents and a lot of the documentation on depreciated elements, I think we can really constrain this for a standard submission. Well, its presence for the informational submission might be necessary to kind of understand what happened in the history of Matroska.
Right, and I think generally for an informational draft, you'll be able to include a lot more with a lower review bar, so that may be easier for you.
This has been, and I'll address that statement first and then back to what I was going to say. That is a true statement to some degree. It's especially true if you make it clear in the informational that this document is documenting work that was done elsewhere, as opposed to this is, new work being done in the IETF. Obviously, that's not true of the proposed standard version. Now, what I was going to comment is the milestones were put together because of what people at the time thought was the best way to organize things. They're not written in stone. They can be changed. I think the separation we're talking about is still probably a good one, and milestones can be worked in parallel if that works for the working group. But I do caution people not to get caught up on a critical path where everything is dependent on your biggest thing. You know, if there are anything that's low hanging fruit, we can get this done quickly and show some output from the working group. That would be nice.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to make some progress in that respect today. So anyway, having not heard detailed discussions on our detailed proposals for when we should revise the dates for these milestones, I think Tess and I will put together a proposal and send it to the lists, and people can complain there if you don't like what we come up with.
So this was just,
Tell me.
sorry. So this slide was just for reference to remind the group of the deliverables. So it ties into kind of what we were discussing about the milestones. I don't know that we need to discuss anything on this slide.
Yeah.
Yep. So I guess without further ado, Steve. Sorry, I should give you an introduction. Steve is going to be talking about Matroska and EBML, and I will let you present your own biography as you.
Yes, so a quick thing about myself. So I created
Could you step up to the mic?
do I have to stay that close? Okay. Yeah, but still very close. Yeah. So I'm Steve Lhomme. I'm from France. I created, not alone, Matroska based on another format that never saw the light of day. When I said we because there was more people involved online in an open community, developed Matroska. We thought a good design would be to have something like XML but in binary, but not too verbose. So we created EBML as the underlying structure for Matroska. And then Matroska was built at the same time. So one of your issues to see if we could work on progressing on Matroska was EBML is not finished. It's completely doable because, well, EBML is already quite stable, and Matroska has a lot of stable parts too. So a lot of stuff can be done in Matroska, even though the EBML spec is not fully done. So if I to finish about myself, so I just did that as a side project, and it evolved into something that's now used in WebM for Google. A lot of VP8, VP9 videos you watch in Chrome or in Android probably are using Matroska. A lot of people download videos using Matroska as well, and now the subject of the working group Cellar is to make it work, have everything useful for storage of long-time preservation of video, either from video sources or film sources. And of course, there's internet involved. The whole Matroska design was based also for streaming videos. That's why Google uses it.
Sorry. I forgot to give you the power to
Advance your slides.
advance your slides. Yep. So you just need to point it. There you go.
So that's for the EBML proposal. So the original EBML specs were done inside the Matroska specifications. Later, we did a side project just for EBML, but it was the same information, but just alone. Now we're working a lot. Every changes to the current specifications are done on GitHub and discussed on the Cellar mailing list. And so that created recently the EBML draft RFC. And it's the same thing for Matroska. So there's also an RFC draft, which is in a very early stage. It's basically a lot of the information that was on the website, even not exactly specification stuff, and cleaned up as an RFC. So some of the issues I identified from the discussions on the mailing list, or I can think of, is in the specification, something that is called timecode throughout the whole Matroska specification is actually something that's timestamp. Timecode in the video world, it's something, you know, the dates and time you can see while playing a video in movies or stuff like that. Timestamp is actually something built in the format to have audio and video and subtitles synchronized. It's not something the user sees. So something we should really change in the specifications is everything that's referred to timecode is actually changed to timestamp. On top of that, we do not have proper timecode support yet. So the thing that people expect to see the time flowing, that's something that is needed by archive people. So that's something that's being worked on the mailing list. The EBML spec review, yeah, so there was, I think it was Tim who mentioned that the EBML specifications do refer to things that are actually defined later, so there might be a bit of reordering of the text or the paragraph, so it flows more better. So that's probably something that needs to be done as well. Also, Tessa also already mentioned a lot of inside the Matroska specifications define things that are not useful for playback. So, like menus, it's a very rarely used feature that's not completely needed now, so we can drop that from the specifications. The codec mapping definitions, even on our website, it's separated from the specifications because basically every codec you use in the container should have its own document to say how you map the codec data into Matroska inside and out. And there's probably other parts that can be dropped or elements that are not used. I think also on the mailing list was mentioned we should define more what kind of attack can be done either on EBML or Matroska. So probably more work needs to be done for that, because obviously since it's a complex format, a lot of things can be done. There are general rules already explained in EBML, but maybe we can be more specific. So how to store time codes I was talking about before. It's an ongoing discussion, and this morning we had a talk with archivists to see what they need and what exists already in their world, so that we don't reinvent the wheel. So one of the things we could do as well to reduce the size of the specification is remove the elements that have been deprecated for a long time and nobody actually uses. We use for now a document, an XML document to generate code, so it always matches the specifications. In that document, we keep the deprecated elements because we want that code to still be able to read these elements. So I think we should still have one way somewhere to know that these elements exist, so somebody doesn't try to use them for something else. So I propose to put them in an annex or one way or another. Yes, also in order to reduce the size of the documents, EBML have a system to define what's default values. If you have a default value, you do not have to write it on the file. It's implied by the semantic of the file. So that was designed to avoid writing values that are always the same, to reduce the size of the files. So when elements do not have a default value or range value, and it's meaningless for these elements. Right now they're written because the original specifications was just a table, so every cell of the table had to be filled. We probably don't need that anymore with the new format we have. So that's what has been done, what we've already discussed. So in the future, there's more work to be done on the drafts, and probably we need a lot more comments as well, at least on EBML, which is already in a good shape. Yeah, so you can post, obviously, your questions on the mailing list and whatever you feel like talking about on the specifications. The formatting probably could still, especially on the Matroska side, be improved. That's something that's been worked on, and we're aware of that. Also, like adherence to the IETF protocols. That's something we're all learning while we're doing this, so we're trying our best. Also, from discussions with Google we had recently, they added a few elements to Matroska for their own needs. Many of them, for example, on the core space, have been added and merged into Matroska. And apparently there's 2 elements that are needed for encryption that they're using to support Whitevine, which wouldn't work without these elements. So we're probably going to add them into Matroska as well to avoid conflicts in the future. And also something I was talking recently, probably right now so EBML and Matroska are tree days designed, and the way it's done in the specifications is when you go down one level the tree or up, you will say which level number you are, but it's not very practical, not very readable. So I think we might change that format into just saying which parent that element belongs to, and it's a lot clearer and faster to read. And I think that's it for me. So you probably have a lot of questions, I hope, except for Dave who knows everything.
Dave Rice, I just wanted to supplement a bit. In our work, like EBML and Matroska are based on prior works that we're moving into the IETF. And with Matroska, for the most part, we're working on removing content, but for the EBML, we're adding a lot of content. We're trying to follow the analogy between EBML and XML, because I mean, there's a lot of understanding, comprehension, and familiarity with XML. Steve mentioned as part of the Matroska libraries, there's a XML document that defines the Matroska elemental structure in XML. So one of the larger components that we added to the EBML specification is that we define EBML kind of as an analogous binary format to XML, but then we add within that specification a way to write an EBML schema, which is the XML representation that he's referring to. So the EBML schema is analogous to an XML schema in that it defines what elements are available and what the constraints and semantics are of a EBML document, of which Matroska is one. So within the EBML work, we're defining a lot of how Matroska is to be defined, and hopefully prepping the way for other formats to use binary XML as an underlying basis.
Any questions? We have 1 hour. Well, we have half an hour left.
Thomas Dayton-Zil. I wanted to expand on the point earlier. I was one of the people on the mailing list. I was making comments about the kind of what to do when you have a bad format or an attack or something. The big thing I'm going for there is not so much just corrupted data, but also just poor software or different encoders. Because right now I think there's many different ways to encode a Matroska file. And the question is, what is valid? And if you make many things valid, it's very easy to get yourself to the point where you start depending on player-specific behavior. And you may generate a file that may look great in one player, and then the other player can't read it or plays it in a different way. And that's that's a lot worse than you might make it work in one place, but then it's very confusing. And I think it's really important to be able to define stuff in the terms of the player behavior, so people realize that they have screwed up, and that they can say this is valid or this isn't valid, and not to just it plays one player.
Okay, so in EBML, I think we tried to cover as much as we could think of in terms of what to do when something bad happens. In Matroska, it's non-existent right now, and we know we have to work on that. And that's also the thing, that the document is quite big right now, but it's actually not as big as it should be, because all the elements have there's I don't know if counted, but there's probably 200 elements. Each have 1 or 2 or 3 lines definition, and that's really not enough to explain for each of them what to expect and what to do when something goes wrong, especially for the important parts for playback, like sizes and stuff like that. So yeah, that's going to be a lot of the work going from now, because we're going to have to define a lot more precisely a lot of the elements.
Yep. No one else's comments. I have a couple more, kind of related to that. One is that you can actually, one way to tackle this is you could probably define something like a standard way to handle this, in that many of the elements, if you define what is valid, you can then give basically standard behavior such as skip the element and do not parse any of the data, or skip skip its parent or the like. So however that bubbles up, you can probably make something. So you don't have to specify the behavior of how each tiny change makes it, but you might be able to more generally specify this.
But that kind of error, it's actually when you can detect it prior to reading, like with a CRC. And most of the time, people do not write CRCs in their files. That's something archive people do not like. They want CRCs to know when there's an error and isolate it as small as possible, maybe fix it even. So that's one case that probably should go in the EBML spec, because the CRC is there and it can be put anywhere in any EBML master element. In Matroska, there's probably a lot more scrutiny that can be put on elements to see what could happen if that element goes bad. And I think that's actually some of the stuff that I could think of, like video size, if you put something completely wrong, or pixel crop that ends up seeing a negative size image, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And the last thing is, I was wondering about, this is also, you talked about this a little bit to you too, but you talked about the EBML schema. So I was wondering what the scope of that would be like. Are you going to use it to validate an entire Matroska document, or is it like, are you going to have the entire validation there described as a schema, or is that going to be just for the correctness of an EBML document, but not necessarily of the Matroska file?
It's certainly at least at the ABML level and the Matroska, see if the semantic is fine. I don't know if the logic can be put in that, like what I was just saying, if pixel cropping gives you invalid data. I don't know if that can be done by an XML EBML schema. I do not think so. I don't know if there's like machine readable things that exist to do that. It would certainly be good because
It's fine with me if the answer is that the EBML schema can't validate a full, like you might need more information.
yeah, but in the
just wanna get
context of video preservation, if we can do as much validation, and that's something they're working on, it's actually something that we want to improve as much as we can.
Okay, thank you.
As David Rice, I wanted to answer a bit of Thomas's question too. We're trying to use the basis of the specification for the XML schema to sort of influence how we can define the EBML schema. So if there is an analogous method of making such a declaration, we're using that. And if we have to go outside of what can be done in XML schema, we are a little bit more cautious because we are defining something new. In the case of EBML, we have a couple areas where we have to define a default value, and in an XML schema, you can define a default even if the element is present. But we have a few instances where the default is not a number or a string, but it's a relator to a related element, and this is, like not a part of what XML can do, but it's part of what Matroska is currently doing. So this is one of our considerations of like having this kind of relational element be a default for another. The other part is that we've had some discussions on the mailing list about having validation rules based on equations of other elements. So the case you're talking about, where like the like pixel crop left can certainly not exceed the width, or like the I guess pixel crop left plus
Right.
pixel crop right cannot be greater than
The width,
with
the pixel
just-
width.
So I mean, we have to define how to express an equation of related elements, like how to get to like an XPath style expression to refer to the related elements, and then like what types of equations we want to support. But I think it's very motivating to move as much of the validation into machine readable context in the EBML schema as we can. But then there's certainly a limit to what we can do, because a lot of the recommendations of the Matroska document are, implies it requires some human intelligence to figure out if they're being used accurately or not.
Jonathan, the next, I just wanted to say that don't boil the ocean on EBML by defining a Turing complete and then publishing a reference implementation of EBML. That's probably more than you want to do.
Yeah, and also this validation we're talking about is just for a schema, so it would be the Matroska part. Doesn't imply EBML validation. If you have a master element, the size of the elements inside cannot exceed the size of the master itself, the element above. And that's the kind of thing that's not really defined in the schema. But it's actually an important check to do, because you can find that something is wrong if you find that that's happening. So even aside from the EBML schema, there are other checks that need to be done as well. They're not described and completely outside of the schema. Anyone else? Chairman and woman?
Chairs.
Chairs? Any chairs?
So I think I sent most of my specific comments on the EBML document and to the list, and at least a few comments on the Matroska one. So we did have some discussion that I'm not sure the current Matroska draft that was submitted directly supports the 2 milestones, as we said before. But the EBML draft does seem to directly support the milestone with that respect. So I think we could issue a call for consensus to adopt that draft as a working group item. So those of you who would like to adopt that draft, please hum now.
The EBML one.
Yes, EBML draft. Oh, okay.
This is Ben.
Yeah.
It's worth saying a couple of words of what that means, and I guess I'll do that since I just came up here. When you adopt a draft, it doesn't mean it's done. It doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean that every word in it won't change before you're done. What it means is that the working group believes that right now, that's the best way forward to fulfilling that, well, piece of the milestone.
Right. The question is, do people in this working group think that is a good start for fulfilling this milestone?
This is David Rice. I think we have a short number, maybe like a half a dozen issues in the EBML GitHub tracker for EBML specification that we need to resolve. But I think this, combined with your quite comprehensive comments about the EBML draft, is about the extent of like where our current thoughts are between where the document is at the moment and where it needs to get finished. So if I understand the status that is being proposed now, where we kind of have the vision is a bit constrained and defined at this point, and we know the tasks we need to do to finish the goal, then I think we are at that point.
Yeah, we are fully aware that it's not ready for final specifications, but yeah, we think it's at least readable and has a lot of the useful information that need to be there.
Right. So yeah, the basic question is, do you think this is a good starting point? And the other major difference between an individual draft and a working group draft is that the editors will be responsible for representing the consensus of the working group in the document and not just their own personal opinions, even if they happen to disagree with the consensus of the working group. But so with that in line, it occurs to me that many of the people working on these documents probably have never done an IETF hum before. So when the chairs call for please hum for or against a position, like you're actually supposed to hum in the room. So let's try that again. All those who would like to adopt the current draft for EBML as a working group item, please hum now. And all those who would not like to adopt the draft as a working group item, please hum now.
Okay.
All right. That sounds like consensus to adopt to me.
Yeah, there were 2 hums in the channel as well.
Okay, thank you.
Were they loud or?
All right, so we will go confirm that decision on the list, but at least we have one milestone that we've adopted a document for, so that's good progress.
Okay. All right. I think then.
Unless there's any other questions.
Right.
No.
Okay. I think then. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you.
I think we'll move on to FFE1, and Jerome Martinez is going to be leading the discussion on that.
Jerome Martinez. So we will talk about the FFV1 video format. The RFC for the draft is on the data tracker, and we have also a GitHub repository hosted by FFmpeg, because FFV1 was initially created by FFmpeg, one of the FFmpeg developers. So I am not the developer of FFV1. I am not the author of FFV1. FFV1 was created by Michael Niedermeyer, and I helped to update the specification, because the first thing we got with FFV1 was a encoder and decoder directly. It was coded, and we want to have something more standard, so we are creating the corresponding specification. There was a first draft of the specification created by Michael Niedermeyer, and now I am helping about having a better specification available and something we can have in the IETF. So what we have done since the beginning of the year, we moved from the old LIX text format, which was initially used, but this is not very, it is not so known as the Markdown. So we switched from LIX format to the Markdown text format. We also updated a lot of the FFV1 specification in order to provide more details, and we don't want to have to dig in the FFmpeg code for creating another decoder. So now we updated a lot of the FFV1 specification with more details about the frame header, the slice header, and we defined what is a plane, how the bitstream is done for planes and lines. And there was already a lot of work about how is the decompression method, how is the algorithm. So this part was not touched. We also created an independent FFV1 implementation shaker in order to have two implementations of a decoder, not only the FFmpeg one. So it is a completely independent implementation of the specification from scratch. We don't reuse the FFmpeg code. And we hope with two decoders and to see what is wrong in the specification, and we want to fix everything in the specification before submitting to the IETF. So in the next 6 months, we want to update again more the specification. And for that, we need some peer review. So we are looking for peer review. We want to create more test files in order to cover all the scope of the FFV1 video format. We want to create buggy files. So there's already some buggy files live. So we want to be sure that the specification says what we should do when we meet some such file. We want to create buggy files in order to stress a bit the decoders and in order to see that the specification is okay with that. And we want first to standardize in IETF the current version already live for FFV1 version 0, 1, and 3. And after that, when it is finished, we want to add new features to FFV1 because there are some requests from other people for adding different new features, like we support some color spaces like UIV and RGB, but we don't support a Bayer color space, or we don't support X, Y, Z, and so on. So we want to add that to FFV1 in order to support any video format, any frame format in the video world. And we want to increase the compression performance by we want to add some different features for the better compression in FFV1.
Jerome, I just wanted to clarify. So for the first document would be version 0, 1, and 3 as an informational document,
Yes.
right? And then
Because
version-
the bitstream already, the files already exist. It is already a lot used, so we cannot change something.
Right.
That. So we want to have a good explanation about what already exists before moving forward to FFV1 version 4. And for version 4, we can change things because it is not already out.
right. So version 4 would be in the standards track. And,
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out the draft that was submitted by Michael Niedermeyer also is currently listed itself as standards track. So that's something you'll want to update in the next version.
Yeah, we may change that. Do you have questions about FFV1 video format?
Tom State, Missoula. One thing I noticed when reading the draft is that there's basically no colorimetry information. It basically just says FFV1 says, YCBCR, or I think it has one little flag that'll switch it between planar and packed. And you have basically the Matroska draft includes tons of all of the color information. Is that the general idea? Is you basically want to have all of the color information in Matroska?
Currently, people use the Matroska container for filling more color space information, transfer characteristics, and so on. It is in Matroska. But we want, with FFV1 version 4, to add this information directly in the FFV1 frame header in order to lose nothing when there is some transwarping, for example. So the first stage is to define transfer characteristic and other color space information in the Matroska container format. And when we finish FFV1 version 0, 1, and 3 informational standard, we move to version 4 and we add this color space information directly in FFV1.
Okay, yeah, having the color information in the video codec itself tends to be more common, I guess, among other formats.
This is more and more common, and we want to do that also. But FFV1 version 3 is already out, and we cannot change the bitstream for the moment. So it is difficult for us to add some information like that.
And then the only thing you have to be careful then is you have to carefully specify what happens, because now you have you may have two copies of the information. One in FFV1 version 4, and one copy in the Matroska potentially. So you have to define what.
This is not
how those
something
interact.
specific to FFV1. Actually, you can have the same problem between Matroska and H.264. H.264 also has some color space information. So this is more global. It is not only about FFV1.
Okay, so that belongs in the Matroska draft, but something.
This is something maybe better to handle in Matroska. What should we do when information in Matroska container and information in the FFV1 or H.264 or any other format are different? But it is something to deal with the container, I think.
Jonathan, sort of generalizing that a little bit. I mean, you could also say that in the standards track version of Matroska, you don't drop this information because it's an FFV1. I guess you want to say, do you want to support standards track Matroska with informational FFV1 or vice versa? You want to just say that if you're using the IETF Matroska, use the IETF FFV1, those are designed to work together, and the older informational ones are designed to work together. But so you're moving the information, not copying it, is what I'm saying. And then in general, do you want to say that should these be mutually dependent?
We don't want to move something. We want to have to the information everywhere, and the container and in the bitstream. Because with the container, when some people transwap, for example, from move to Matroska or from Matroska to MPEG TS, such information not in the FFV1 bitstream or not in every other video codec, this information is often lost, and we don't want to lose such important information. But it is not something specific actually to FFV1. A lot of other containers already do that. For example, MOV, QuickTime, they already save such data in the container, and H.264 already saves the same data. So we do the same as the others.
Steve, trying to answer further the question. Actually, every codec that's put in Matroska has a mapping to put it inside and outside. For example, in MP3, MPEG-3 or MP3 audio, it's possible because MP3 is also a container and a codec. Even though it's small, you can remove completely the container part and still work in Matroska. It's not often used because when you take it out of Matroska, programs are lazy and they don't take care of putting back the information. But for example, right now, FFV1 is using the AVI mapping, which is a general case for whatever you can put in AVI, you can put in Matroska. But if we're going to define a specific mapping for FFV1 in Matroska, then we could define how it's put in, removing information that's already set in the container, so there's no redundancy. No, so there would not be a possibility of having a mismatch. And when it's taken out, then you have to put it back, take it from the container and put it back in whatever other format you will put. And it's the same for basically every codec we're going to define in the maybe in other specifications around Matroska.
And actually, the color space information duplicated in the container is not the only thing duplicated. We have width, height, we have frame rate. It is often duplicated. So it is not the only information. Sometimes a container needs it, and sometimes we also need it in the bit stream in order to be more to lose nothing when we do some transwapping or something else.
I can go next. Steve Botsko. I just want to say this duplication issue is not unique to container formats, right? It's certainly possible to have an H.264 bit stream in a SIP call have different information in the bit stream than was advertised in the SIP SDP. So I don't know that we need to solve this problem. You know, the container format probably has a reason to have information that's duplicative. If someone is foolish enough to write a tool that allows inconsistent information, then it's kind of on them. You can kind of warn them in the specification not to do that, but I don't know that you need to design the container so that it's impossible to do that.
On the topic of conflicts, I wanted to mention that occasionally it's intentional. There are some codecs that contain information, such as, like I'm thinking about the DV codec contains aspect ratio as a flag that only supports like 4.3 and 16.9. So if DV information that is not that aspect ratio is encoded at that, like that value could be overwritten by the container, the correct information. I mean, I think it might be like if we want to store a bit stream in a container, if some of the information of the bit stream cannot be clarified because of the limitations of that specification, then we have the container that can correct it. So if we have some content that is 21.9 aspect ratio and it's in DV, I mean, if it was in QuickTime or Matroska, this could be clarified. If we want it to be clear in DV alone, it's not possible with the specification. We have to have a container that is has a specification that clarifies that the information is intended to override what's in the codec, because sometimes the codec is not able to store it.
I didn't quite get that.
Sorry.
Thomas Stady again from Mozilla. I also agree with that. And the other thing I really want that I actually disagree. I would actually very much like the behavior when you have these mismatches to be specified. It can be specified either in the mapping or in the Matroska container, depending on how generic it can be. But I just don't want the case where people, well, say they take a format, they use a badly written, if they use some buggy software, they produce this conflict information, then they go see the player and the file looks fine, and then they send it to some other player that chooses it in the opposite order, and then plays incorrectly.
I am not sure it is the role in this work group to do that, because this is something more generic between every container and every video or audio format. So putting that in our work group, this is maybe not our work actually.
Well, I mean, for the working group, it is only for Matroska versus FV1, right? Only that part matters. But if it's something that can be generic in Matroska, then you might as well put it in.
We can define something between Matroska and FFV1, but if we do FFV1 in Move, for example, this is not us.
Of course, if this is all defined in the mapping, then it only applies to those two.
Okay.
This is David Rice. I wanted to add that there are many significant characteristics of video that are traditionally held in the encoding, such as like the color space information in H.264 in ProRes, and some streams will declare if they're broadcast range or full range, but I'm not aware of any container that stores this information. But part of the goals of Matroska is to also document uncompressed video, which has no ability to describe any of these characteristics at all. So all these characteristics that are even more typically put into the encoding in more modern codecs is not possible with uncompressed video. So for video like that, we have to rely on the container to do everything. I know in the QuickTime specification, there are some parts of the specification that say if the container is used to store uncompressed video, then these particular parts are mandated. But if the content is not, then they aren't. So potentially we could add some conditional constraints and conditional mandates, to clarify when the data should be used or when it should be deferred to the encoding.
Other questions?
We have from the Deborah from Pete Bubestinger that he agrees with Dave.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, if any other questions, concerns, comments about either Matroska or FFA1 or EBML? Okay. So we are doing very well on time, which is great. I'd rather have more time than run out of time. But I think what I want to talk about at the end of the session was kind of moving forward and our next steps, discuss the possibility of an in-person meeting in 2017 if the group finds it necessary in Chicago in March of 2017. I think we've kind of discussed or started to discuss 2 and 3. As Tim mentioned, he and I will review the milestones and then circulate revised schedule to the list. And then I think the 4, 5, and 6 pertain mostly to having more people involved in kind of the document writing and shepherding process. I guess more on the editing and reviewing side. So if you are interested and have not yet commented on the list or taken a look at the draft, please do so, and please share freely and frequently on the Cellar mailing list. So if there are any questions, comments, or ideas about that, please share them with us. 'Cause I think, yeah, I would say looking at different ways to kind of encourage people to participate other than just, writing to the mailing list over and over again. Please comment, please comment, please comment. So I don't know if people have been in other groups where there has been a more effective way of getting people to participate. Okay, so maybe a discussion topic for the list. And then number 7 was an end to FLAC neglect. FLAC is included in our list of working group deliverables, and we have not done anything with FLAC yet. There is, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the least amount of work needs to be done with FLAC in order to get it ready for the standards track. But I haven't reached out to the developers of FLAC since the working group was approved. So I don't know if anybody here has been working on FLAC, not as part of this group, but just in general, or has been following the developer list there. Nope.
David Rice, I mean, I helped organize the sort of markdown to RFC draft conversion for EBML, Matroska, and FFV1. So if like one of the blocking issues for the working group's commentary on FLAC is the fact that it exists in, I think it's in HTML in their own GitHub repository. I could help write the make file to make the conversion from the specification as it exists in their current form as the community maintains it into RFC, so that we can have the document in a form that is comfortably reviewable by both communities, the working group and the FLAC developers. But I would, there needs to be some type of bridge between the two communities to like facilitate the discussion better.
Right, I absolutely agree. I don't know if there's any sort of cross participation on the between the FLAC and the the Cellar Cellar working group. So that I think communicating with the FLAC developers and writing the make file to get that into the IRC format would be spectacular. And I think that's, I mean, I'm not going to assign or, say something that will assign work to somebody else. But, I think this is something that could be done in parallel with the current, current working group milestones. I don't think, it's going to be very controversial or require extensive review. I could be wrong, but that's my viewpoint. So if there's anybody else has a differing viewpoint, opinion, question, comment? Nope. Okay. All right. Is there anything else to? No, not for me. Okay. I'm just going to do a last call for questions, comments, issues. Anything you'd like to say to close out our inaugural working group meeting?
Did the people working on these documents find this meeting actually helpful?
This is David Rice. Yes. I mean, I should say, like, kind of the process to build up to the meeting has been especially helpful. The July 8th deadline for the submission of drafts for consideration for the discussion here, was a big motivator because a lot of us are quite deadline driven. So you will notice a huge amount of work happened because of this deadline, particularly on Matroska. Matroska was not in good shape for this kind of draft submission at this time. So there was a lot of work to kind of adjust the formatting and gather missing sections like security considerations and abstracts. So the structure of preparing for the meeting helped quite a bit. Also, I know now that we are returning from the meeting, a lot of the commentary that you and others had provided is quite comprehensive and gives us a lot of work to address between now and the next meeting.
I think we need to state for the historical record just exactly how big the Matroska specification is.
Sure. I guess this is sort of one question to get advice on, because we have a make file that concatenates a collection of markdown files, and we have the EBML schema representation of Matroska, which is an XML document to define the structure. So I made an XSL to convert it into Markdown, to run it through mmmark, to run it through XML to RFC. The total pile is 220 pages at the end of it. Some of that is quite massive. I think there's a lot of changes I can make. For instance, if I make some optimization to the conversion of the EBML schema to Markdown, I think we could probably throw out 60 pages of white space in how that is presented in the RFC. So some minor work can get that number down quite substantially. Something where I don't have so much experience in how RFC, the IETF, deals with massive specifications, but there are a couple sections of Matroska that are quite relevant to move into separate sections. For instance, the Matroska specification defines a structural component for how tags are stored, and they are semantically defined. And then the document also contains a lot of space attached to specific tags that can be used within that structure. And I think like the metadata vocabulary of Matroska could stand alone as its own specification, possibly, that is, very much dependent on the Matroska one. The other one is that, question is that we have the representation of Matroska's elemental structure as an XML document, an EBML schema. We could submit this, just attach it to the specification in its XML form, because that's how it's used in its machine readable context. But I presumed it would be a little bit more reviewable if we converted it, had the process to convert it to Markdown, so that there's tables in the RFC draft rather than just like a raw XML dump. But having the tables and the XML is, of course, redundant. The XML is what we are intending to standardize through the EBML process. So I'm not sure if this redundancy is helpful or not.
Okay, thank you very much.
This is Ben. I am not a document editor, but I've been stacking up comments. And so let me see if I can go back to the beginning. Oh, the idea that the deadline helped to drive the work. I'm both glad and horrified to hear that. The deadlines to drive work are an attractive nuisance in the IETF. I implore people to try to not get into that habit. Work can happen anytime. We don't have to be at meetings to discuss things. There's a mailing list and such. Especially if you're planning a meeting cadence of, once a year, or I guess that's not quite once a year, maybe, but still. So you do end up with you're in danger of ending up with the great big python that just ate the whole pig right before every meeting, and that's not the most efficient way to work. I know that I made a joke earlier today. You probably heard about the normative statement, the normative statement of the kind of must, but I know you won't. And this probably falls into that because people will become deadline driven. So it's one thing to keep in mind with your meeting schedule. On the size of the document, I thought I had a simple response to that, but my response became more complicated as I listened to Dave. Because now if you ask everyone at the ISG what they think of massively big documents, you'll get 20 different answers. And the ISG is not 20 people, in case people didn't know that. It can be useful to break them up, especially if you can break them up in a way that they can be reviewed rather independently. But if breaking them up just means we get handed a hairball of interlocking drafts that all have to be reviewed together, that doesn't really help all that much. Taking out 60 pages of white space doesn't really help all that much because we don't really review white space much. Is that an ASCII white or Unicode white? What was I going to say now? When you start talking about the XML being what people use versus the text being explanatory, we need to be careful about what we consider normative. And if the idea, I think I heard the idea that the XML might be the normative part, and everything else may be explanatory. And that's not out of the question, but that requires some thinking about it. And I don't know if we have good answers or can. We have done strange things with codex in the past we're probably not going to do again. For example, having code be normative in Opus, but.
Right. So if I understood correctly, you're generating a lot of the tables in the current Matroska draft from the XML. Yeah. So there may be fewer issues if the explanatory part is machine generated from the.
I guess it depends on if you have someone else who's going to implement this from scratch. What do you expect them to use to implement from?
So just to add a clarifying comment, like to Ben, we've kind of adopted this from the way a lot of XML documents are standardized, where there'll be the XML schema, which is the machine readable version, and we can use tools like XML-lint to do validation, and there will usually have to be a human readable component of the same information, and in many instances I've seen the human readable component is produced from the machine readable one. So one is the derivative of the other. I mean, the EBML had been conceived of XML as an analogous, like related format from the beginning. So like the method of handling an EBML schema we had been trying to maintain as analogous as well, as far as how normative it is to the rest of the documentation.
Okay, I think that's good enough for now. It's just something we kind of need to keep track of. Normative XML is not an unusual thing. But we just need to be clear so that a developer who's new knows what they need to be paying attention to.
Do we have examples of other RFCs that have had normative XML schemas in them? Or
maybe not this massively.
There probably aren't that many schemas that have been this massive. And just a general note for document editors, if you have not read RFC 6919, I highly encourage you to do so. In relations to the comment of must, but we know you won't. All right, anything else?
No.
All right, so I think that we can end the meeting. Thank you everyone for coming.
And I want to especially thank Steve and Jerome for volunteering to lead the discussions. Thank you very much. Okay. You don't have a gavel or anything like that? Did you get your... Okay. About an hour and 15 minutes. So like if we were to look at is it possible to request shorter meeting times? Like if we send it
I think 90 minutes is the shortest.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Yeah, anyone who has not signed the blue sheets, they're up here at the front. Please come do so.
Do we hold on to these? Hold on to these and then submit them. The blue sheets.
I don't know. I've never done this before.
I know. I just read it, and then of course, like I immediately forget. It's like I know I read it, but I can't remember what it said.
There's a point in which you stop absorbing new information.
Yeah. That's gonna be good. Yeah, you did?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad, it did. I'm just, I haven't shaken that jet lag yet. Yeah, I think we discussed it, you two, and then I'm hoping that more